Hi, and welcome to Film Forums. I'm Richard Williams, creator of this platform, a place dedicated to the filmmaking community. We interview members of the film industry to find out what it really takes to make a movie, bring a script to screen, or secure that acting role. If that sounds good to you, please subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on your favourite podcasting platform so you can be the first to know when an episode drops. Thank you.
Departure for New Earth to commence in T-minus 3 minutes.
Just a little friendly advice. Just get out of my seat. Come on. There you go.
For the next 6 months, we will blaze across space and time. I hope it's the paradise they said it would be.
Hey, where you been hiding?
I don't know what could have done this.
Something seems to be dissolving him from the inside out. It's not human.
All right, who wants barbecue?
Welcome to Film Forums. Thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We've definitely got to focus on looking to inspire the next generation, really, and also, you know, maybe filmmakers are not quite established yet, who have made maybe their first movie or not quite yet, and just looking for a bit of inspiration, really.
Tell them all the things I screwed up, and hopefully that helps.
Well, we might well get onto that, actually, and that would be great if you're happy to divulge that.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
funny. A lot of filmmakers are very happy to tell us how they've screwed up, and because
like
they've learned from that. So
yes, as long as you learn, that's the crucial thing, for sure.
Can you introduce yourself? Just tell us a little bit about yourself first.
My name's John Suits. Thanks so much for having me on. And this has been a problem today. I just got an iPhone for the first time in a while, and don't yet know how to use it. And now I'm noticing it makes dings while I'm on my Zoom. I'm sorry. I don't know how to stop it. So I'm a filmmaker. I worked in independent film for many years. And then about 4 years ago, I've been more focused on commercials and then still making movies, but also doing a lot of commercial directing. After having a couple kids, time-wise, it works a little better. So yes.
Can you tell us what your upcoming movie Breach is about, and why did the title change from Anti-Life, or was that always a working title?
The film is about a bunch of humans who are, Earth is dying and they're on their way to a new Earth and on a sort of arc type of spaceship. And while they're traveling, some sort of alien entity is on the ship and starts infecting the crew. And some craziness happens from there. And in terms of the title changing, it's a good question. It was called Anti-Life and now it's called Breach, but I don't know why.
Leave that as a mystery then. Yeah.
Yes,
okay. No,
yes,
that's cool.
yes, for sure.
I'm down for that. Yeah, no worries.
It's probably relating to marketing, something like that.
Yes, the thing is the people that are much smarter than me make those decisions. So I just go like, cool.
My suspicion was because of this year and what's happened, it might have a negative connotation possibly.
That actually is a good guess. And also that was, I was gonna say a funny thing, but a not funny thing is, we shot this last October, November, and, it has to do with like a plague kind of, the leaving Earth because of this plague. And then I'm like, oh man, this is kind of a bummer now because there's, something bad happening to everybody. And, but one of the things that we got really wrong about that is like when in the scene at the beginning, everybody's leaving, nobody's wearing masks. And now we know if there's a virus around, that everybody will be wearing masks. So, that's a good learning post COVID life.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You directed Pandemic a few years ago and now Breach, which features a plague on Earth, which you've kind of just alluded to. Have you been surprised at the apparent recent surge in online viewing figures in recent months for movies about viruses? And why do you think so many people have turned to them during this time? It seems counterintuitive to me, but yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. And, I think there's something in everyone that they want a little bit of that comfort, you know what I mean? Or maybe not comfort's the wrong word, but like, it's almost like you're, by engulfing yourself in the world that you're currently in, maybe it helps in some way. Because what was actually funny is that I directed this other movie about the end of the world that was on a spaceship called 3022 and before Breach. And it's not a very uplifting movie, but it came out on Netflix in like March, and it was in the top 10 on Netflix, along with movies like 2012 and I can't remember, like Aftermath, and all the movies were like, the world is over movies. I'm like, man, everybody is just in a funk right now, because it's like right around when the shutdown started. And so I think that's probably part of human nature is sort of, maybe there's some kind of comfort in it. I don't know why, but I think in an equal way, there's a lot of probably interest in escapism or just uplifting or positive movies, I would imagine, as well. But everybody's got to find what helps them get through this.
Yeah, and absolutely. Sometimes it's a case of indulging in what's happening right now, to kind of not to disassociate, but actually to accept what's happening and kind of maybe learn, maybe even try and learn from what's in the movie in terms of coping mechanisms, that sort of thing. But who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, I know Contagion, like I haven't rewatched it, but I know Contagion, like, it was a very accurate scientifically to a lot of things that we have. I mean, obviously the virus and that's a little more deadly, but I think people have found that probably were watching that to actually like learn about viruses, and things like that.
There was also a show that became popular on Netflix. It was an Asian show, and it was made very popular with this because it was literally about a coronavirus, and it was
oh wow
eerily identical to what we're going through. Like it was, because when I heard about it, I was like, okay, I'll go watch it. And I was literally freaked out. This was back in March time as well. But there was, you're right. There was quite a lot of like focus on that type of movie or TV show. Science fiction, although it's fiction, it often does come into reality. Either new inventions are made that match what we've seen in movies previously, or certain events or situations end up kind of playing out. So it's interesting to see how someone's imagination can go somewhere that's actually a lot more realistic than we realize at the time that it's out.
Totally.
So could you tell us a little bit about how you actually got involved in this particular project on Breach?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, I did this movie 3022, which I shot 2 Octobers ago, like so a little less than a year before we shot Breach, and it was end of the world spaceship movie, and so it was but it was very different than Breach in that it's a much more sort of introspective, quiet, depressing movie, which I guess is something I'm kind of into. But then I got contacted by Danny Roth, who's a producer on Breach, and I'd worked with him before actually on Pandemic, and he's like, hey, I've got this end of the world spaceship movie, and he's like, and Bruce Willis is in it. So that was obviously something that immediately I grew up loving Bruce Willis movies, and so that just sounded like an amazing opportunity. And Corey Large, who's a producer and writer on the movie, is a great collaborator and great to work with, along with Danny. And so that's kind of how I got involved in it. It was different for me because I came into the process much later than I'm used to, and I also wasn't a producer on it. And so I was more of like a hired director, and that was a very different experience for me. It was cool though, because it allows you to not have to worry about a lot of things that I was used to worrying about and wearing many hats. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to it.
So was, the whole principal cast already attached to the project, or was it just Bruce at the time you came on board?
It was Bruce, and I think Cody was already on, I believe, at that point. Or actually, I'm not totally sure, but definitely Bruce was on at that point. And then Corey has a lot of great connections and knows a lot of actors, and he was able to kind of get a bunch of people. Obviously, got a wealth of friends and contacts that helped to cast out the other parts. But it was sort of, a lot of the other cast came in a lot closer to when we were shooting, and but yeah, it got filled out really quick.
When I was researching for this interview, my heart skipped a beat just for a moment when I saw what I thought was the next Die Hard movie due out this year. It ended up being a commercial, as obviously because you're involved in it. Do you know if there are any plans for another Die Hard movie, and would you put your name in the hat for that? Presumably you would.
I would put my name in the hat. I don't think anybody else would, but but sure. No, I it was actually really fun working on that commercial. I worked with this agency a bunch, directing commercials. And they're like, we've got this, Die Hard Bruce Willis commercial. And I'm like, I just worked with Bruce Willis. So it kind of like, you would assume that it came through that experience, but it was actually a coincidence. I mean, it definitely helped when I was bidding on the project that I'd worked with him. but it was this agency that I work with all the time, the marketing arm that had come up with the concept, and that was really fun. And we shot, in COVID, so it was very difficult because we couldn't have anybody be close to each other. So you're shooting an action spot, but nobody can be within 6 feet of each other. And so all the sequences where Bruce is interacting with people, he's alone, and so like in the car, we had to shoot it all on green screen and put him and Argyle, in the car together and all those things. So there's a lot of, and we had to build a whole advanced auto parts store because for COVID safety, not shooting in a practical store, they thought it was safer so it's just, which reminded me kind of The Room. I don't know if you know that movie where they like build a rooftop, or like an alleyway next to an alleyway. Cause it's like, well, we're making a movie, but so it's sort of like, it was not the most efficient way to do it, but what was actually nice about that is, it was a 4-day shoot to make something 2 minutes long, whereas Breach, you have 15 days to shoot something, 90 some minutes long. And so that's kind of what I like about commercials a lot of the time is you can really take the time you want to craft things. But I also love, movies where it's just like a sprint the whole time, where you're just like, you put your head down and you go, and try to get it done. But yes, there's a lot of people fooled and intentionally into thinking it was a movie. And then when it came out, it was, actually an ad. So, yeah.
Could you tell us about the route that you took to filmmaking? Did you go to film school or did you take a different way?
Some people are like, I'm going to direct movies, and like that's their path. And for me, I started taking video classes in high school. 11th grade was the first year they had it. And then when I went to college, I majored in digital video. And that's when like the XL1 had just come out, which was like so incredible. Now you look back at it and you're like, oh my gosh, what a horrible camera. But at the time it was amazing. And while I was an undergrad, I had directed 2 features, and both I've never watched again. I mean, they're awful, awful, awful movies. But again, that thing of learning from your experiences, I did so many things wrong. Like we were getting a boom mic, and I was like, we ended up ordering the longest one because I'm like, well, the longer it is, the better, which actually means it's more directional. The person who was holding it was like, well, how should I hold it? I'm like, hold it in the middle, like down the middle. So you've got a super directional mic pointed at the floor, and then your people talking on the side. So the whole movie, it's like, you can't hear the dialogue, just as an example of learning from your mistakes. But so I did that. And then I actually went to grad school at Cal Arts up in Valencia for film directing. And while I was there, I made a feature called Breathing Room. I did it with Gabriel Cowan, who I was in school with. And we did it for like 20 grand, shot in 7 days. But that was like a psychological thriller, and it ended up getting distributed around the world. And then Gabe and I formed a company called New Artists Alliance, and we made a bunch of movies together. And I did that for about a decade. And then again, after my second kid was born, I got pretty burnt out on it. So I moved to commercials, and then I miss movies. So then I'll kind of like make a movie and then be like, okay, I need a break again. And then, it's just this different, they always say when you have kids, I don't know if you guys have kids, but they always say that it changes your priorities. And I'm like, well, not me. I'm different. And then sure enough, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, it does change your priorities. And, it's harder when you're like, for this one, I had to go to Georgia for 2 months, and that was brutal. I came back every weekend. I flew back on red eye out, and then it was a 3-hour drive. So I was exhausted, but I stopped once we started shooting, but it's hard, that part of it, which people don't think about as much, I think.
At the time of recording this, so we're talking to you, I've got a 7-month-old who was born back in April. So
Wow.
I can't really imagine, working on a film set or having to work hours and hours away from home like that. And it must be a real wrench to have to do that, I should think.
And well, congratulations. I'm sure you're like in that haze that lasts the first couple of years, and then you're like, wait, I'm a person again.
It's all good fun.
If you were to give advice, on, for example, finding finance, because you were talking about how you were more, indie narrative film based previously, and you made a film on 20K. Did you guys fund that yourselves, or did you go out and seek funding? Do you have any experience of that process?
On that one, Gabe, who was my producing partner, was much more involved in that part of the process, at least definitely early on and for the majority of it. And I eventually learned how to raise financing and get distribution deals in place, because we ended up doing, I think, 21 or 22 movies together. And the more we did it, the more established we became in that field, and we're able to start doing things like pre-selling and could get distribution deals in place beforehand. And so it was interesting because I'm much more of an introvert and I'm not like good at networking per se. And I'm also not good at being the guy that's like, hey, I'm going to make the next, Paranormal Activity and give me all your money. Like that was never my approach. So when I started raising financing, I actually would often start by saying, all right, imagine you're flushing all this money down the toilet. Are you still okay? Because if you're not, then you should not invest in this movie. That was kind of like my opening pitch line. And then I would talk about the pragmatic reality of like what the film market's like and how our movies have performed and that stuff. And actually what was surprising is people responded to it because I was being honest / pessimistic about the movie versus being the guy telling them they're going to make $100 million and stuff. And trying to give a more accurate portrayal of how the marketplace works and all the dangers of it. And that for me also was important because if they were giving me money to make a movie, I wanted to make sure they were going in with realistic expectations, because it's hard if you're like, you're going to make $100 million and they lose $500,000 and they're really mad at you because you misled them. So for me, it was hard to have that burden of being responsible for that because a lot of things are outside your control. Like we get a minimum guarantee from a distribution company and they put the movie out and then go out of business and never pay. So there'd be things like that even if you protect the movie as much as you can, there's things that can happen that are outside your control. So how I approach it though is just to try to be as like, make sure that they can't say at the end of the process, like, you never told me that blank, So I wanted to make sure that I could at least in good conscience get the investment with them going into the situation with as much knowledge as I could offer.
I think that's really good because then if you do over deliver, which, certainly you did, then those people definitely want to work with you again and they're going to be far more happy because they didn't have any expectations.
That was actually something that was very different on Breach. That was my sort of first movie in a very long time where I was just hired onto the movie. So I got involved much later in the process and I wasn't a producer on it. And so it was a very different experience, but it was cool in some ways to you have a lot less sort of control, but it also means you have a lot less responsibility, and not having that burden of, dealing with the financiers and the distribution deals and the contracts and all that stuff. Like that actually was really nice.
What do you wish you'd been told when you first embarked on a career as a filmmaker? So what advice would you have liked to have had when you started out?
I think a very important thing that it took me a long time to learn is listening to feedback. I think when I was in film school, like I'd show a short film or a script and everybody would be like, here's all the stuff wrong with it. Like, here's why it doesn't work. I'd be like, no. You guys are all wrong. And I'm right. Like that's like in my brain. I would sit there and listen to the feedback and be like, oh, Meanwhile, thinking like, you're stupid, you don't get it. And then I make it and be like, oh, I'm stupid. So I think like that's a big part of the process is always growing, always learning. And as soon as you think you've got it all figured out, that's when you stop growing as a filmmaker, and I think and it's also being realistic. The film industry goes through waves of what the value of a movie is. And there's other fields like TV and commercials and things like that are much more stable in a lot of ways, but for film, you've got to love it to do it. But when you get into a project as well, I think it's important to be realistic about what it is and don't lie to yourself about what it is. Like know what you're making and then do the best you can with the circumstances. Again, like if you're doing a commercial, you've got 4 days for 2 minutes, you can do a lot more, but like, don't try to take that attitude to a movie where you have 15 days. Because if you try to approach it that way, you're going to not end up having a movie at the end of the day. So that's kind of, I think, the way I try to work is just to approach every situation, knowing what it is and trying to do the best I can with the circumstances always.
I'd just really like to thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for talking to me. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.